therapy in Puyallup, Washington, and we've been talking the last couple of weeks about general health and heart health. Um, Last week we talked about the American Heart Association's recommendations for activity levels every week. And what the American Heart Association recommends is 150 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic activity every week. So you can get that with 30 minutes for 5 days or 25 minutes a day for 6 days. But we talked last week briefly that the American Heart Association recommendations are only taking into account the number of minutes that you're actively exercising per week. So they were trying to take the total volume of activity that you do in a week and spread that out. So it's a little bit ridiculous if you think about it. If I were to exercise for 150 minutes on Monday and then not exercise on Tuesday through Sunday, that's not exactly the recipe for a healthy life. And researchers did this type of measurement because it's easy to keep track of. You can measure the number of total minutes per week and compare one group to another group and get a good idea about people's activity overall. But that doesn't do us a whole lot of good when we're looking at overall health. They do, to be fair, show pretty good numbers, and that's why they have those recommendations as far as how good it is for your heart. But again, if I did all that exercise on Monday and nothing for the rest of the week, that's not great. If we narrow that window that we're looking at, it's even worse. If you exercise for 25 minutes and then sat on the couch for 23 hours and 35 minutes, it's, again, clearly not a recipe for good health. So over the past 20 years or so, researchers have been looking at what we call exercise physiology. You can get a textbook on exercise physiology. You can see how the body responds and what happens when you're moving, the physiology, what your body is doing of exercise. And that's great. But what's happening for those other 23 hours if we're not exercising? We have to create sort of a different category. And it's amazing that it's taken researchers this long to figure it out, because it's really simple math. If I'm active for 1 hour a day, I'm inactive for 23 hours a day, it really matters what I do during that 23-hour time frame. So you need to look at that. So what they did is, instead of looking at number of hours of exercise, they started to look at what people were doing during the time that they're not exercising. And we call that just physical activity. So we've got exercise, and we have health benefits that we've been studying for years that the American Heart Association is recommending that we do. And that's good. It gives us a positive bump. But if we're not doing any physical activity during the rest of the day, we're still in a bad place. And so when researchers talk about this now, there's a new phrase that they've coined, which they say sitting is the new smoking. And where that comes from is the idea that, yes, exercise is good, but it doesn't eliminate the negative effects of not being active. So in the same way that if I smoke but also exercise, the smoking is still detrimental. If I exercise but I'm inactive, the inactivity is still detrimental. There's no amount of exercise that can eliminate the negative effects of too much sitting. I suppose if you reached a point where you were exercising all day, then you've eliminated the sitting. But they're two separate categories. You've got the positive category of exercise, and then you've got the negative category of inactivity. So we want to decrease the amount of inactivity that we have and increase the amount of exercise that we had. But until recently, researchers were looking at that as the same thing, and they're not. We have exercise physiology, and now we have this whole new field of inactivity physiology. What's happening to your body when you're not active? So an example of this came from some interesting research that was done on workers. And what they did is they took the typical way that the American Heart Association measures exercise, and they gave polls to these people to see how much they were exercising. But there were two groups. Group number one were office workers, and group number two were warehouse workers. Now you had people within both of those groups that were doing regular exercise. However, you had others that were not doing regular exercise. So that allows us to get four groups: the office worker who exercises, the office worker who doesn't exercise, the warehouse worker who exercises, and the warehouse worker who doesn't exercise. And if you look at this group, what happens is researchers, based on the American Heart Association information, they would rate both exercise groups as the healthiest people, which is true. But you would think that the exercising group of office workers would beat out the non-exercising group of warehouse workers, and that was where the research got interesting. If you ranked those four groups from healthiest to least healthy, what you have is the warehouse workers who are exercising because they're getting the benefits of exercise, and then they're also getting the benefits of not inactivity, decreasing their inactivity. Then the second group was the warehouse workers who didn't exercise. So their inactivity levels were low, which was good. Even though they weren't exercising, they were still healthier than the other group. So the third group then became the exercising office workers, and at the bottom was the non-exercising office worker. And if you think about it, it's really quite simple math. If we took somebody who was sleeping for 8 hours a day, which sleep is another topic we can cover another day, but let's say they're sleeping for 8 hours a day, that gives us 16 hours to work with. If I have an office worker who is exercising, they're exercising, let's say, for a whole hour, that means we have 15 hours of inactivity as they sit to eat, sit to drive to work, sit to drive home from work, sit at their job, sit when they get home and watch some television. So we have 1 hour of activity and 15 hours of inactivity. Now if we compare that to the warehouse workers who are exercising, we have now 15 hours, and 8 of those are spent with physical activity. They're not exercising per se, but they're walking around the warehouse, they're lifting things, they're moving. It's what we call physical activity. That group is far better because now we have only 7 hours that they're sitting as opposed to 15 hours. Now, if you take the warehouse workers who are not exercising, that's still better than the exercising office workers, because those exercising office workers are inactive for 15 hours, where the non-exercising warehouse workers are only inactive for 8. So it's, again, simple math. 15 hours of inactivity, 8 hours of inactivity. The person who's inactive the least has the better health. Now, if you were exercising for that extra hour, it would be even better. So, what are our takeaways? We'll talk about more of this next week, but let's say you're an office worker, you're sitting most of the day. How can we break that sitting up? We want to be able to get up every 20 minutes if possible and move around. Some other ideas, Get a standing desk so that you're not sitting the entire day. If you're able to do meetings, you can do a walking meeting. Get up and actually walk with your boss or walk with your employees so that you're moving around when you're working. Now, you may think that's impossible to do, but little breaks have actually been shown to improve productivity as well. It gets more blood flowing, it wakes us up, it gets us going. So not only do you have the benefits of improved work efficiency, you have the benefits of better health for your long-term employees. So here's my recommendations for this week. Try to get up at least every 20 minutes. Don't watch more than 2 hours of TV per day, and less is better, and we'll talk more about that next week. Don't sit for more than 6 hours a day if possible, and less sitting is better. And then try to get more physical activity. That's the one we talked about last week, but it's still important. Physical activity and exercise are the two pillars that we're looking for your heart health and your overall health. So if it's difficult for you to move around and it's difficult for you to reach these recommendations, you're not able to stand for more than 10 or 15 minutes maybe, usually it's pain that is a problem with that. And if that's the case, you can come in and we can do a free consultation to check you out and see what areas are keeping you from being as active as you'd like to be. So check out our webpage at soundbalancept.com/stretch-release, and you can see how we can help you with some of these minor aches or major pains that you have, and we can get you moving again so that pain is not limiting your activity and activity is not limiting your lifespan. So that's it for this week. Tune in next week and we'll talk more about those recommendations and why we're putting in those recommendations. Stay healthy.